Karon, I am Karen Ivy Maxain, an internal medicine resident from Universidad de Santa Isabel in Naga City in the Philippines. And today I will be presenting a case of a patient with chronic myeloidosis in a type 2 diabetes mellitus patient. So this patient presented with intermittent episodes of fever associated with generalized body weakness and chills. Specifically, I will be describing the history, presentation, and clinical findings associated with melioidosis. I will be discussing its pathophysiology, epidemiology, and its treatment. Our patient is Vicky, a 55-year-old female, married, a dentist, who was admitted last October of 2020. History of present illness started around 2 months prior to admission. Our patient had intermittent episodes of fever with the highest temperature of 38 degrees Celsius, associated with occasional hypogastric pain. There was no dysuria noted. Our patient self-medicated with paracetamol 500 mg per tablet every 4 hours as needed, as well as amoxicillin and clavulanic acid for 1 week with partial relief of symptoms. Until 1 month prior to admission, there was recurrence of febrile episodes with the highest temperature of 37.8 degrees Celsius. There was no associated cough, nor colds, dysuria, or hypogastric pain. However, at this time, the patient had a temporal parietal headache, for which she consulted a neurologist. A cranial CT scan was requested, and it revealed no intracranial mass, nor any heart nor hemorrhage. She was given pain medications as needed. 3 weeks prior to admission, the patient had anorexia as well as insomnia. There were still episodes of fever at around 39 degrees Celsius. And during this time, she consulted a private physician and was given an unrecalled antibiotic taken once a day for a week. 2 weeks prior to admission, there was still persistence of body weakness and chills. The patient was advised for admission by her family and friends, but the patient refused. A week prior to admission, the patient was now severely anorexic and wasn't able to eat any solid food. Her diet consisted of liquids including milk, blended fruit, and Gatorade. However, the patient was still not amenable to admission to a hospital. Few hours prior to admission, the patient was found on the floor by her husband, poorly responsive and with difficulty of breathing. Her husband then rushed her to the hospital, where she was subsequently admitted. For our patient's past medical history, she is vaccinated for COVID-19 with 1 booster. She is a known case of hypertension with the following maintenance medications. She is also a known diabetic. However, she is poorly compliant to her medications. Therefore, she has poor control of her glycemic status. She is also post-total abdominal hysterectomy with bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy secondary to a ruptured endometriosis. She has no known allergies to any food nor medications. Our patient is the second of 4 siblings. Her brothers as well as her mother are all diabetic. Her mother is likewise hypertensive, and unfortunately, one of her brothers expired due to chronic kidney disease. On physical examination, our patient is weak-looking, drowsy, and was in severe respiratory distress. Her initial blood glucose levels were elevated at 463 mg per deciliter. She was hypotensive at 60/50, tachycardic at 103 beats per minute, tachypneic at 24, with oxygen saturation of 88% air. Her body mass index was 24 kg per meter squared, which was overweight by Asia Pacific standards. She had dry skin and mucous membranes with pale conjunctiva. She also had freckles on bilateral lung fields. There was no bipedal bleeding. Neurological examination showed spontaneous movement of her extremities, and she had no signs of meningeal irritation. At this time, we were considering the following differentials. First would be hyperosmolar hyperglycemic syndrome, since our patient has poorly controlled diabetes. She also had a long protracted course of illness, and she presented with anorexia, dehydration, and an altered sensorium. Another differential would be diabetic ketoacidosis, since we have an obvious precipitate which was an infection, and she had poorly controlled diabetes. Our patient, however, presented with acute symptoms. Lastly, we were entertaining a case of sepsis secondary to pneumonia high risk to rule out COVID-19 infection. She had the following physical examination findings, and she had severe respiratory distress. Again, she was immunocompromised as she was diabetic, which was poorly controlled. So for our meeting impression, we had septic shock secondary to pneumonia high risk, rule out the COVID-19 infection, to rule out hyperosmolar hyperglycemic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes mellitus and control. So this patient, as we discussed, had signs and symptoms of septic shock with an elevated glucose levels. She was managed by a multidisciplinary team of pulmonologists, endocrinologists, infectious diseases, and nephrologists. Her chest X-ray on admission showed cardiomegaly with bilateral hazy infiltrates indicative of pneumonia. Her arterial blood gas showed respiratory alkalosis with hypoxemia. Her complete blood count showed mild anemia with leukocytosis and neutrophilic predominance. Her D-dimer was likewise elevated at this time, and she was started on a low molecular weight heparin. Her creatinine was likewise elevated with an estimated filtration rate of 20 ml per day. This patient was started on an inotrope with norepinephrine, and she also underwent an RT-PCR test for which she was negative. She was also hooked to a high-flow nasal cannula and was started on IV carotid. However, this patient still had febrile episodes and as well as hypotension. We continued titration of her inotropes, and her initial blood cultures were positive for gram-negative bacilli. As the days went by, the final blood culture results showed Burkholderia pseudomallate. Her urine culture was also positive for Candida albicans. So this patient was then started on fluconazole 200 milligrams IV once a day. However, during the 8th hospital day, she was still positive for Burkholderia. Ceftaziline 2 grams IV every 8 hours were also started. The patient gradually improved, and her blood pressure as well as her vital signs remained stable. This allowed for the discontinuation of her norepinephrine with stabilization of her blood glucose levels, which are now at around 110 to 190 milligrams. Her creatinine dropped to 77, and her electrolytes were within normal limits. Her patient was discharged improved during the 14th hospital day, but she was advised close follow-up with a team of specialists. However, we continued ceftaziline for 14 weeks. So this is a geographical distribution of the cases of mellitus worldwide by a study done in 2016. As you can see, there are multiple occurrences of mellitus as evidenced by the blood clots. Mellitus is predominantly a disease of subtropical and tropical regions. It is endemic in Australia, parts of Southeast Asia, as well as the Indian subcontinent. So its incidence and severity is determined by the host, environmental, as well as other virulence factors. It also affects people of all ages. This was initially described by Whitmore and Krishnawasami in 1912 after reports of severe pneumonia and sepsis. The early diagnosis of mellitus is challenging for clinicians because of its ability to mimic other diseases. The incident cases also peak during the monsoon rains, especially among individuals with immune dysfunction. The Philippines is an island country in the Southeast Asia and it makes for an interesting reservoir for various diverse bacterial flora. We live in Naga City, Camarines Sur, a place where rainfall is abundant throughout most of the year. This patient was actually admitted in October of 2022, which was in the middle of the rainy season. In the Philippines, the rainy season occurs from June to November. Burkholderia pseudomallei is the gram-negative pathogen responsible for melioidosis, and it causes a clinical spectrum ranging from pneumonia, cutaneous infection, disseminated disease, as well as fulminant sepsis. It belongs to the genus Burkholderia, which contains over 80 formally named species. It is a saprophytic environmental organism found in the rhizosphere, in moist soil, and in water. It is also regarded as an opportunistic infection, especially among immunocompromised individuals. For this patient, she had type 2 diabetes mellitus. As you know, type 2 diabetes mellitus causes a low cellular adaptive response, and it may have a higher hemoglobin A1C with a direct relationship to higher sources of infection. The incubation period is roughly 1 to 21 days. However, there are cases of late reactivation occurring years after exposure. The occurrence of the cases and the presence of the organism in the environment are related to factors such as temperature, soil moisture content, water drainage, soil type, pH, salinity, iron content, and even geomorphic position. The organism can be transferred via waterways and is increased in the setting of eroded soil during heavy rainfall. The annual incidence is affected by humidity, monsoons, and tropical cyclones. Rainfall is thought to increase bacterial concentration via the rise of the water, and severe weather events and the wind may also increase bacterially contaminated aerosols, resulting in further acquisition. The disease spectrum is again variable, and it may present in multisystemic forms, including the following. Asymptomatic seroconversion is the most common, and it occurs among endemic regions, as we have discussed. The acute form of the infection occurs for majority of patients at around 85%, and its symptom duration is less than 2 months. For some patients, this may progress to chronic infection, like in our patient. The symptom duration is now more than 2 months, and comparing chronic with the acute infection, the chronic form has a better prognosis. The treatment for melioidosis would include antibiotic therapy, and thankfully we have a wide armamentarium available. We have what is called the intensive therapy, which consists of meropenem 25 mg per kilogram, as well as ceftazidime 50 mg per kilogram. The duration of the treatment is around 10 to 14 days, but it may be extended to 4 to 8 weeks for severe disease. We also have what is called the eradication therapy, and this is given after intensive therapy to prevent relapse. Here we use the trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole or doxycycline. Doxycycline is usually reserved for patients who have adverse reactions to trimethoprim. To conclude, the overall survival of patients with melioidosis is affected by multiple factors, including pre-morbid post-determinants, diabetes, chronic renal disease, and older age negatively impact mortality. For patients over 50 years of age who are now elderly, they have an increased odds ratio of 2. The presence of any risk factor also increases the risk of death. With regard to bacteremia, a repeated blood culture after the first or second week is a strong predictor of mortality. Even after adjustment with gender, diabetes, blood pressure, pneumonia, and the duration of antibiotics. To summarize, melioidosis is an important tropical disease and it is associated with significant mortality, usually due to severe sepsis and its complications. Thank you all for your time.